The rain hammered against the windows of my studio apartment in Portland that October evening, each drop a reminder of the tears I had refused to shed. I sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor, surrounded by half-finished design projects and cold coffee cups, staring at my phone screen until my eyes burned. The funeral had been 6 hours ago. 6 hours since I watched them lower my mother's casket into the muddy earth, while strangers who never knew her real pain dabbed at their eyes with expensive handkerchiefs. 6 hours since I stood alone under that black umbrella, my father nowhere to be found. My name is Chloe Vance, and until 3 days ago, I believed my mother, Serafina Vance, had died of a sudden heart attack. That is what my father told me in a phone call so cold it could have frozen the Pacific. Maxwell Thorne, investment banker, philanthropist, and apparently the world's most convincing liar, had called me at 2 a.m. with the news. His voice had been flat, businesslike, as if he were informing me of a cancelled meeting rather than my mother's death. He said he could not attend the funeral due to an urgent business trip to the Bahamas. An urgent business trip. Those words had echoed in my mind all day. I should have known something was wrong. My mother had been healthy, vibrant even, despite the sadness that had clouded her eyes for the past 5 years. She was a celebrated sculptor, her bronze figures displayed in galleries from Seattle to San Francisco. Her art spoke of strength, resilience, survival. Yet in private, she had become a shadow of herself, and I had been too absorbed in my own career as a graphic designer to notice the warning signs, the way she flinched when her phone rang, the bruises she explained away as clumsiness in the studio, the tremor in her voice when she mentioned my father's name. The funeral had been a grotesque performance. Art dealers and society vultures had circled the grave, whispering about the value of her remaining pieces, already calculating their worth now that the artist could produce no more. I had wanted to scream at them, to tell them they knew nothing about the woman who had taught me to see beauty in broken things, who had held me through every nightmare, who had sacrificed everything for a man who treated her like a possession to be displayed and discarded at will. After the service, I had driven back to my apartment in a daze, my clothes soaked through, my body numb. I changed into sweats and made myself sit down to handle the administrative nightmare that follows death. Bank accounts to close, utilities to cancel, a life to dismantle piece by piece. But exhaustion and grief made me procrastinate, and instead, I found myself scrolling mindlessly through social media, looking for anything to distract me from the gaping hole in my chest. That was when I saw it. My father's Instagram account, which I followed out of some misguided sense of filial duty despite our estranged relationship, had been updated 4 hours ago. 4 hours ago, while I was standing at my mother's grave in the pouring rain, watching her casket disappear into the earth. The image loaded slowly on my phone, and when it finally appeared in full resolution, something inside me shattered more completely than I thought possible. There was Maxwell Thorne, my father, standing on the deck of a luxury yacht, the turquoise waters of the Bahamas sparkling behind him. He wore white linen pants and an unbuttoned silk shirt, his silver hair perfectly styled, his face lit up with a smile I had not seen him direct at my mother in years. Next to him, pressed against his side with his arm draped possessively around her waist, was a woman who could not have been older than 30. She was stunning, with long dark hair and a body showcased in a designer bikini. The caption read, "New beginnings, life is too short for regrets. Number Bahamas bliss. Number living my best life." I stared at that photo for a long time, my mind unable to process what my eyes were seeing. New beginnings. My mother was dead, and he was celebrating new beginnings. My mother was in the ground, and he was drinking champagne on a yacht. My mother had loved this man for 32 years, and he could not even be bothered to attend her funeral. The phone slipped from my trembling hands, and before I could think, before I could stop myself, I picked it up and hurled it across the room with all the strength I had. It hit the exposed brick wall with a satisfying crash, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of cracks. The sound echoed in my empty apartment, and in the silence that followed, I whispered the words that would change everything. "You will pay for this." I do not know how long I sat there on the floor, staring at the broken phone, my hands shaking with rage and grief and something else I could not name. Eventually, my landline rang, the shrill sound cutting through my thoughts. I considered not answering, but muscle memory made me reach for the receiver. "Chloe, honey, I have been trying to reach your cell for an hour." It was Isabella Mendez, my best friend since college, her voice warm with concern. Izzy was a freelance investigative journalist with a nose for trouble and a heart bigger than her 5'2" frame. "I just wanted to check on you after today. How are you holding up?" "I am fine," I lied automatically, my voice hollow. "You are a terrible liar, Chloe. You always have been." There was a pause, and I could hear the rustle of papers on her end. Izzy was always working on some story, chasing down leads at all hours. "I am coming over." "No, Izzy, really, I just need to be alone right now." "That is exactly when you should not be alone." Her tone shifted, becoming more serious. "Chloe, there is something I need to talk to you about. Something about your mother's death. I have been looking into it, and there are some things that do not add up. My heart stuttered. What do you mean they do not add up? Not over the phone. I will be there in 20 minutes. She hung up before I could protest further. I spent those 20 minutes pacing my apartment, my mind racing. What could Izzy have found? My mother died of a heart attack. That was what the death certificate said. That was what the hospital told me. But Izzy was thorough, meticulous. If she said something was wrong, something was wrong. When she arrived, her dark curls plastered to her head from the rain, she took one look at my face and pulled me into a fierce hug. "Oh, Chloe," she whispered. "I am so sorry." We sat at my small kitchen table, and Izzy pulled out her laptop, her fingers already flying across the keyboard. "I started digging the moment I heard about Serafina's death," she explained. "Your mother was one of the strongest people I ever met. The idea of her just dropping dead from a heart attack at 55 with no prior history of heart disease felt wrong. So I called in a favor at the hospital. And?" My voice was barely above a whisper. "And the medical examiner noted some irregularities. Nothing conclusive enough to order an autopsy without family request, but enough to raise questions. Bruising on her arms that looked defensive, elevated levels of stress hormones, signs of long-term psychological trauma." Izzy looked up at me, her dark eyes serious. "Chloe, I think your mother was being abused." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. "By who?" But I already knew the answer. I had always known, somewhere deep down, in the place where we bury the truths too painful to examine. "Your father," Izzy said quietly. "I have been researching Maxwell Thorne's finances. There are discrepancies. Large sums moving to offshore accounts. Business dealings with some very questionable people. And Chloe, there is more. I found out that he tried to have your mother declared mentally incompetent 3 months ago, probably to gain control of her estate. She was worth millions from her art sales alone." I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I need air." "Chloe." "Please, Izzy, I just need a minute." She nodded, understanding, and I walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. Outside, Portland was drowning in rain, the streets reflecting the neon signs of the city. My whole life had been a lie. My father had not just neglected my mother. He had tormented her, controlled her, and ultimately, I was starting to believe, killed her. The thought was so monstrous that my mind rebelled against it, but the pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. The way my mother had pulled away from me in recent years, as if she were afraid to involve me in whatever hell she was living through. The way she had insisted I pursue my career in Seattle, away from their home in Portland. The way she had stopped talking about the future. Izzy came to stand beside me. "I know this is overwhelming. But Chloe, if there is even a chance that your mother's death was not natural, do you not want to know the truth?" "Of course I do," I said fiercely, turning to face her. "I want to know everything. And I want him to pay." We spent the rest of the night going through Izzy's research. She had been thorough, compiling a dossier that would make any investigative reporter proud. Bank statements showing suspicious transfers. Emails between my father and his business partners discussing the Serafina problem. Text messages to the young woman from the yacht, messages that dated back over a year, while my mother was still alive. "He was planning to leave her," Izzy said. "But if he divorced her, she would have been entitled to half of everything. And your father, from what I can tell, is not the sharing type. So he killed her instead," I finished, my voice flat. "He killed her and made it look like a heart attack." "I think so, but proving it is another matter. We would need concrete evidence, something that directly links him to her death." I thought about the house where I grew up, the sprawling Tudor-style mansion in the West Hills that my father had purchased with the profits from one of his first big deals. My mother's studio had been in the converted carriage house, but my father's office was in the main house, a fortress of mahogany and leather where he conducted his business. If there was evidence, it would be there. "I know where to look," I said slowly. "My father keeps everything. Every contract, every document. He is paranoid about leaving a paper trail anywhere but his personal safe." Izzy's eyes widened. "You want to break into your father's house?" "It is my house too. I grew up there. I still have a key." I was already formulating a plan, adrenaline replacing the grief-induced fog. "He is in the Bahamas, probably for at least another week if his Instagram is anything to go by. The house will be empty except for the security system, and I know the code. My mother made me memorize it years ago in case of emergencies." "Chloe, this is crazy. If he catches you..." "He will not catch me," I interrupted. "Because you are going to help me. You are good with technology. You can disable the cameras, right?" Izzy bit her lip, considering. I could see the journalist in her warring with the friend, the desire for the truth battling with the need to keep me safe. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, but we do this smart. We plan everything out, and if anything feels wrong, we abort." We spent the next 2 days preparing. Izzy researched the security system my father had installed, a state-of-the-art setup that cost more than most people's cars. She found vulnerabilities ways to create a loop in the video feed that would show empty rooms while we searched. I drew detailed floor plans of the house from memory, marking my father's office and the location of his safe. On the third night, we drove through the rain-slick streets of Portland, heading into the wealthy neighborhood of the West Hills. The house loomed before us, dark except for the exterior lights that illuminated the manicured lawn and the perfect hedges my mother had once loved to tend. Looking at it now, it seemed less like a home and more like a mausoleum, a monument to everything my father valued: status, wealth, the appearance of success. I used my old key on the side door, holding my breath as I punched in the security code. For a terrifying moment, I thought it would not work, that my father had changed it. But the panel beeped softly, and the red light turned green. We were in. The house was exactly as I remembered it, frozen in time. My mother's paintings still hung on the walls, her sculptures still graced the hallways. It was as if my father wanted to preserve the illusion of their marriage even after her death. Or perhaps he simply had not bothered to remove her things yet, too busy with his new beginning in the Bahamas. Izzy set up her laptop in the foyer, her fingers flying over the keys as she hacked into the security system. "I've got a 15-minute loop," she whispered. "We need to move fast." My father's office was on the second floor, a vast room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. I had only been in here a handful of times as a child, and always under strict supervision. It smelled of leather and expensive cigars, a scent that made my stomach turn. The safe was hidden behind one of my mother's paintings, a bitter irony that was not lost on me. The painting was one of her earlier works, a bronze sculpture of a woman breaking free from chains. My father had always said it was his favorite piece, but now I wondered if he had hung it there as a cruel joke, a reminder to my mother of what she could not do. I lifted the painting carefully, revealing the digital safe embedded in the wall. My hands were shaking as I entered the code: my mother's birthday. It had been her birthday last month. I had called her, and she had sounded so tired, so defeated. That had been the last time I spoke to her. The safe clicked open. Inside was a treasure trove of documents. Contracts, legal papers, folders thick with financial statements. I began pulling them out, handing them to Izzy, who photographed each page with her phone. We worked in silence, the only sounds our breathing and the occasional rustle of paper. Then I found it, a folder labeled Serafina in my father's precise handwriting. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. A forged contract signing over all of my mother's assets to my father in the event of her death. A life insurance policy I had never known existed, worth $5 million, with my father as the sole beneficiary. And beneath those, most damning of all, a small digital recorder. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. My father's voice filled the office, cold and menacing. "You will sign the papers, Serafina, or I will make your life a living hell. You think I will not do it? I own you. I have always owned you. Without me, you are nothing." My mother's voice came next, broken and pleading. "Maxwell, please. I just want a divorce. I will not ask for anything. Just let me go." "Let you go?" My father's laugh was cruel. "And let you run off to start a new life with your pathetic little art friends? Let you drag my name through the mud? Tell everyone about our marriage?" "No, Serafina. You are mine until the day you die. And if you try to leave me, I will destroy everything you love, starting with Chloe." I had to stop the recording, my hand over my mouth to keep from crying out. He had threatened me, used me as leverage against my mother. That was why she had pushed me away, why she had insisted I build a life far from Portland. She had been trying to protect me. "Chloe, we need to go," Izzy hissed. "The loop is almost done." But I was not finished. There was another file on the recorder. I pressed play again. This time, the audio was darker, more recent based on the timestamp. I could hear my mother crying, and then the sound of someone my father breathing heavily. "Do you know how easy it would be?" his voice said, low and threatening. "One little injection. Something to stop that heart of yours. They would never suspect a thing. A woman your age, under stress? Heart attacks happen all the time." The recording ended. I stood there, frozen, the recorder clutched in my hand. This was it. This was proof that my father had planned my mother's murder. He had not just thought about it. He had told her exactly how he would do it. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the sound of a door slamming somewhere below us. Izzy's eyes went wide. The security system just sent an alert. Someone is in the house. Panic flooded through me. My father? He is supposed to be in the Bahamas. I do not know, but we need to move now. I shoved the recorder and the most important documents into my jacket and ran for the door. Behind us, I could hear footsteps on the stairs, heavy and deliberate. We raced down the back hallway toward the servants' staircase, the way I used to sneak around as a child. The footsteps followed, faster now, and I heard a man's voice shout, "Stop! This is private property." Not my father. Security. My father must have hired additional guards after my mother's death, protecting his assets. We burst through the side door into the rain, and I heard the deep bark of dogs. Of course, my father had guard dogs now. We ran across the lawn toward Izzy's car, parked on the street beyond the property line. The dogs were gaining, their snarls mixing with the shouts of the guards behind us. I do not know how we made it. Pure adrenaline, perhaps, or sheer desperation. Izzy fumbled with her keys, finally got the door open, and we threw ourselves inside. She peeled away from the curb just as the first dog reached the car, its teeth snapping at the tires. We drove in silence for several minutes, both of us breathing hard, until we were safely across the river in southeast Portland. Finally, Izzy pulled into a 24-hour diner parking lot and turned off the engine. Her hands were shaking on the steering wheel. "That was insane," she said. "We could have been arrested. We could have been killed by those dogs." "But we were not," I said, pulling the recorder from my jacket. "And we got what we needed." Over coffee and pie that neither of us could eat, we listened to the recordings again. Each time through, I felt the pieces of my heart break a little more. This was my father. The man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had paid for my education, who had walked me through the Art Institute of Portland on weekends and explained the difference between Impressionism and Expressionism. How could that man be the same monster on this recording? But I knew the answer. He had always been both. I had just chosen to see only the good, to excuse the bad as stress or ambition or the price of success. My mother had paid for my willful blindness with her life. "What do we do now?" Izzy asked. "Do we go to the police?" I thought about it. My father had friends on the police force. He donated generously to the Portland Police Association. He played golf with the district attorney. Walking into a police station with this evidence felt like walking into a trap. "We need someone outside his sphere of influence," I said slowly. "Someone who cannot be bought or intimidated." "The FBI," Izzy suggested. "Federal crimes, money laundering, which we have evidence of from those financial documents. And if we can prove he murdered your mother, that is interstate commerce issues since some of those offshore accounts are in the Cayman Islands." It took us another week to build an airtight case. We enlisted the help of a former colleague of Izzy's, a cybersecurity expert, who helped us trace the money flows and document the illegal transactions. We contacted the medical examiner and requested a full autopsy of my mother's body, citing new evidence of foul play. And we reached out to a federal prosecutor named Olivia Sterling, a woman with a reputation for taking down white-collar criminals with the same fervor most prosecutors reserved for violent offenders. Olivia Sterling was exactly what we needed. She was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, and she had been building a case against my father's business associates for over a year. When we presented her with our evidence, she listened with growing intensity, occasionally asking pointed questions. "This is good," she finally said, sitting back in her chair. "This is very good, but I want him to think he is safe. I want him to believe he got away with it. Can you do that, Chloe? Can you pretend everything is normal?" "I can do anything if it means putting him away," I replied. So we set a trap. My father returned from the Bahamas 2 weeks after my mother's funeral, tanned and relaxed, with his new girlfriend in tow. He called me to his office at Thorne Investments, ostensibly to discuss my mother's estate. I dressed in black, played the part of the grieving daughter, and sat across from him in his glass and steel office with its view of downtown Portland. "Chloe, darling," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "I know this has been difficult for you, losing your mother so suddenly." I bit down on my tongue to keep from screaming at him. "It has been hard," I managed. "I want to make things easier for you," he continued, sliding a folder across the desk. "These are the papers to transfer ownership of your mother's estate to me. It is what she would have wanted, I am sure. I will manage everything, make sure her legacy is protected." Her legacy. As if he cared about anything beyond the dollar signs attached to her name. I made a show of reading through the documents, even though I already knew what they said. He was trying to steal everything my mother had worked for, every piece of art, every royalty payment, every dime. And he had forged her signature on documents supposedly signed weeks before her death. "I need some time to think about this," I said carefully. His eyes narrowed. "There is nothing to think about, Chloe. I am your father. I am trying to help you." "I understand. I just want to talk to a lawyer first." The temperature in the room dropped. "A lawyer? Why would you need a lawyer? Do you not trust me?" "It is not about trust," I lied. "It is just what Mom would have wanted me to do. She always said to have a lawyer review anything important." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the calculation in his eyes. Finally, he smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "Of course, take all the time you need. But Chloe, do not take too long. These things are time-sensitive." I left his office feeling like I needed a shower, but the trap was set. Olivia Sterling had been listening to the entire conversation through a wire I had worn, and his attempts to pressure me into signing fraudulent documents was just one more crime to add to the list. The next phase of our plan was more public. Izzy wrote an article for a major investigative journalism outlet, detailing the suspicious circumstances around my mother's death and the financial irregularities in my father's business dealings. She did not accuse him directly, leaving just enough room for doubt while painting a damning picture. The article went viral. Within days, other journalists picked up the story. The hashtag Justice for Serafina started trending on social media. People who had known my mother began coming forward with their own stories of her fear, her sadness, the way she had changed in the last years of her life. The art world, which had revered her, turned its attention to the man who had been her husband. My father tried to control the narrative. He gave interviews claiming I was emotionally unstable, grieving, lashing out at him because I was angry he had moved on with his life. He played the part of the wronged husband, the devoted father concerned about his daughter's mental health. But the court of public opinion is a powerful thing, and the tide was turning against him. Behind the scenes, Olivia Sterling and her team at the FBI were building their case. The autopsy results came back showing trace amounts of a drug that could induce cardiac arrest, administered in doses small enough to be mistaken for natural causes, but consistent with the timeline of my mother's death. Combined with the recordings, the financial documents, and testimony from people who had witnessed my father's abuse, they had enough to bring charges. The morning they arrested Maxwell Thorne, I was there. Olivia had offered to let me watch from a safe distance, and I accepted. I needed to see it. Needed to see him realize that he had not gotten away with it after all. They came for him at his office, during a board meeting. I watched through the glass walls as federal agents entered the conference room, as my father's face went from annoyed to confused to terrified. They put him in handcuffs in front of his colleagues, his business partners, everyone he had spent his life trying to impress. As they led him past me toward the elevator, he saw me standing there. Our eyes met. "You," he hissed. "You did this." "No," I said calmly. "You did this. I just made sure everyone knew the truth." The trial took 9 months. 9 long months of testimony, of reliving my mother's pain, of watching my father's lawyers try to tear apart every piece of evidence we had gathered. But Olivia Sterling was brilliant, and the case was solid. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, fraud, obstruction of justice. The list went on and on. When the judge sentenced him to 50 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no joy, just a hollow emptiness where grief and rage had been. My mother was still dead. No amount of justice could bring her back. But as I walked out of the courthouse into the weak Portland sunshine, Izzy's hand in mine, I felt something else. A lightness, as if I had been carrying a weight I did not know was there, and someone had finally lifted it. My mother's story would not end with her murder. It would end with justice. Her art would endure. Her legacy would be more than just the woman who died at the hands of a monster. 6 months after the trial, I made a decision. I sold my mother's house, the place where she had suffered so much. I could not bear to live there, could not walk those halls without hearing her voice in the recordings, seeing the ghost of her pain in every corner. With the money, and with the proceeds from the sale of her artwork that my father could no longer touch, I opened a gallery. It was in Cannon Beach, a small coastal town on the Oregon coast, where my mother used to take me as a child. We had spent weekends there, just the two of us, walking on the sand and collecting shells. It was one of the few places I remembered her being truly happy. The gallery was called Serafina and Chloe, Art of Resilience. It featured my mother's work, of course, but also the work of other artists who had survived trauma, who had turned their pain into something beautiful. It became a place of healing, not just for the artists but for the people who visited. My mother's sculptures took on new meaning in this context. The bronze figures she had created, women breaking free from chains, rising from ashes, standing tall against storms, they were no longer just art. They were testimonies. They were proof that survival was possible, that beauty could emerge from suffering. I found unexpected happiness there, in that small gallery overlooking the Pacific. I met someone, a local architect named Daniel, who was helping restore some of the historic buildings in town. He was kind and patient, and he understood when I woke up from nightmares, when I could not talk about my father, when I needed space to grieve. Love, I learned, did not have to be complicated or painful. It could be simple and steady and safe. Izzy visited often, sometimes to work on articles, sometimes just to sit on the beach with me and watch the waves. She had won awards for her coverage of my father's trial, but she said the real reward was seeing me build a life that my mother would have been proud of. One evening, about a year after the gallery opened, I was standing at the window watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Daniel was in the back, finishing up some renovations. Izzy had just left after a weekend visit. I felt at peace in a way I had not thought possible. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from an unknown number. "Your mother would be proud of you." I stared at the message, my heart racing. Wrong number? A kind stranger who had read about the trial? Or something else? I typed back, "Who is this?" The response came almost immediately. A friend. Someone who knew her. Someone who wanted to make sure the truth came out. I thought about that night, over a year ago now, when I had received the text that started everything. The text that had seemed to come from my mother's phone, telling me to come to the cemetery. In all the chaos that followed, I had never figured out who sent it. The phone had been disconnected by then, lost or destroyed. "Was it you?" I typed. "Did you send that message that night?" There was a long pause. Then, "Some ghosts cannot rest until justice is served. She can rest now. And so can you." The number went offline, untraceable. I never found out who it was. Maybe it was someone who had known about my father's crimes and wanted them exposed. Maybe it was someone my mother had confided in before she died. Or maybe, in some small way I will never understand, it really was my mother, reaching out from beyond to make sure her story was told. I choose to believe the latter. I choose to believe that in that moment, when I saw my father's Instagram post and felt my world shatter, something shifted in the universe. My mother's spirit, her love, her desperate need to protect me even after death, found a way to send me a message, found a way to bring me to her before she was truly gone. Standing at the gallery window, watching the light fade from the sky, I made a decision. I walked to the main display area where my mother's largest sculpture stood. It was a woman with arms raised to the sky, her face tilted toward the sun, her body in bronze but somehow radiating light. My mother had called it unbroken. I placed my hand on the cool metal, feeling the texture of my mother's fingerprints in the bronze, the mark of her hands shaping this figure. "Thank you, Mom," I whispered. "For everything, for fighting, for protecting me, for making sure the truth came out." And I swear, in that moment, I felt warmth emanate from the sculpture, as if somewhere, somehow, she had heard me. Daniel came out from the back room, wiping his hands on a rag. "Ready to head home?" he asked. I looked around the gallery one last time, at the art that told stories of survival and strength, at the legacy my mother had left behind. "Yes," I said, taking his hand. "I am ready." Because I had learned something through all of this, through the pain and the betrayal and the long fight for justice. I had learned that we are not defined by what is done to us, but by what we do in response. I had learned that love should never require you to shrink yourself, to suffer in silence, to accept cruelty as the price of belonging. I had learned that sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what is killing you, even if it means walking alone. My mother had not been able to walk away in time, but she had made sure I could. She had protected me from my father's threats, pushed me to build a life of my own, and in the end, found a way to expose him so that he could never hurt anyone else. That night, I dreamed of her for the first time since her death. Not the fearful, broken woman from the recordings, but the mother I remembered from childhood. The one who danced in the studio to classical music, who laughed freely, who told me I could be anything I wanted to be. In the dream, she was standing on a beach, the same beach outside my gallery. The sun was rising behind her, turning her hair into spun gold. "You did it, baby," she said, her voice clear and strong. "You saved us both." I woke up crying, but they were not tears of grief. They were tears of release, of healing, of finally being able to let go of the weight I had carried for so long. My mother was at peace. And slowly, day by day, I was finding my way to peace too. Justice, I learned, does not erase the past. It does not bring back what was lost or undo the damage that was done. But it matters. It matters that the truth was told. It matters that my father faced consequences for his actions. It matters that my mother's story did not end with her death, but with her daughter standing up and fighting back. And perhaps most importantly, it matters that I learned I was stronger than I ever knew. Strong enough to face the darkest truth about my family. Strong enough to stand up to a man who had terrified my mother into silence. Strong enough to build a new life from the ashes of the old one. The gallery thrived. I found joy in the work, in helping other artists tell their stories, in creating a space where pain could be transformed into beauty. Daniel and I got married on the beach, a small ceremony with just Izzy and a few close friends. Olivia Sterling came too, having become an unexpected friend through the trial. She told me she kept a photo of my mother's sculpture, unbroken, on her desk at the FBI office, a reminder of why she did the work she did. Life moved forward in ways I had not imagined possible during those dark days after the funeral. The gallery expanded, and I hired 2 assistants to help manage the daily operations. This gave me time to pursue my own art again, something I had abandoned during the years of fighting for justice. I discovered that I had inherited more than just my mother's determination. I had inherited her eye for beauty, her ability to take raw materials and shape them into something meaningful. I started working with reclaimed wood and metal, creating mixed media pieces that explored themes of transformation and rebirth. My first collection, which I titled After the Storm, sold out within a month. Critics compared my work to my mother's, noting the same raw emotional honesty, the same refusal to look away from pain while simultaneously celebrating survival. I took it as the highest compliment. But not everything was peaceful. My father, even from prison, tried to maintain control. He filed lawsuits from behind bars, challenging the disposition of my mother's estate, claiming I had coerced her into changing her will before her death. His lawyers were expensive and persistent. Each court date brought back the trauma, forced me to relive the worst moments, to sit across from him in a courtroom and listen to his lies. The first time I had to face him in court after his conviction, I nearly turned back. Daniel drove me to the courthouse in Portland, and I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, my hands gripping the door handle, unable to make myself get out of the car. I could see my father through the window, being led in by guards in his orange prison jumpsuit, and the sight of him made my stomach churn. "You do not have to do this," Daniel said quietly. "Your lawyers can handle it without you." But I shook my head. "Yes, I do. If I let him scare me away now, he wins. Even from prison, he wins." So I walked into that courtroom, and I sat in the witness stand, and I told the truth. Again, every painful detail. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who had presided over dozens of estate cases, saw through my father's manipulation immediately. She denied his claims and imposed sanctions on his lawyers for filing frivolous motions. As I left the courtroom, my father called out to me, Chloe, please, I am your father. How can you do this to me?" I stopped, turned to look at him. He looked older, smaller somehow, diminished by the prison uniform and the chains around his ankles. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. "Almost. You stopped being my father the day you hurt my mother," I said clearly, "and you were never the man I thought you were." His face twisted with rage. "You will regret this. You are nothing without me. You and your pathetic little gallery, playing artist like your mother. You are both failures." The guards moved to restrain him, but I held up my hand. I walked closer to him, close enough to see the veins standing out on his forehead, the flecks of spittle at the corners of his mouth, close enough to smell the industrial soap and desperation that clung to him. "My mother was not a failure," I said softly. "She was brilliant and talented and kind. And she survived 32 years married to a monster. That makes her stronger than you will ever be. As for me, I am successful not in spite of you, but because I am nothing like you. I learned what not to be by watching you, so thank you for that lesson at least." I walked away while he was still shouting, his voice echoing off the marble walls of the courthouse. Outside, Izzy was waiting with Daniel. She had covered the hearing for her podcast about domestic violence and financial abuse. We went to lunch at a small Vietnamese restaurant, and for the first time in months, I felt hungry. Felt alive. "That was badass," Izzy said, raising her glass of iced tea and a toast. "Seriously, Chloe, the way you just shut him down." "It felt good," I admitted, "like I finally said all the things I have been holding inside." "Your mom would have been proud," Daniel added, squeezing my hand. I thought about that a lot in the days that followed. Would my mother have been proud? Or would she have wanted me to forgive him? To find some way to maintain a relationship despite everything? I would never know. But I chose to believe that she would have wanted me to be free, to live without the weight of his toxicity dragging me down. The lawsuits continued sporadically for another year, each one more desperate than the last. My father tried to claim that I had stolen documents from his house, that I had fabricated the recordings, that I had conspired with Izzy and Olivia to frame him. None of it went anywhere. The evidence was too solid, the case against him too overwhelming. Eventually, even his lawyers abandoned him, unwilling to waste more time on a client who could not pay their fees and had no chance of success. In the 3rd year after my mother's death, something unexpected happened. I received a letter forwarded from the prison. It was from my father, handwritten on lined paper. My first instinct was to throw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it late one night, sitting on the deck of the small house Daniel and I had built overlooking the ocean. The letter was rambling, disjointed, the handwriting barely legible in places. He wrote about his childhood, about his own abusive father, about the pressure he had felt to succeed, to provide, to be someone important. He wrote about meeting my mother, about how her talent had intimidated and inspired him in equal measure. He wrote about watching me grow up, about the pride he had felt at my accomplishments and the fear that I would surpass him. And then, buried in the middle of the 4th page, were the words I had never expected to read. "I am sorry." Not sorry for what he had done, specifically. Not an acknowledgement of the pain he had caused or the life he had taken. Just those 2 words, floating in a sea of justifications and explanations, and attempts to make me understand why he had become what he was. I read the letter 3 times, searching for something genuine, some glimpse of remorse that went deeper than self-pity. I did not find it. My father was sorry, perhaps, but only because he had been caught. Only because he was spending his final years in a cell instead of on a yacht in the Bahamas. He was sorry for himself, not for us. I burned the letter in the fire pit outside, watching the pages curl and blacken in the flames. Daniel came out to sit beside me, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders against the cool ocean breeze. "What did it say?" he asked. "Nothing that mattered," I replied. "Nothing true." Some people might say I should have forgiven him, that holding on to anger and resentment would only poison my own life, that I needed to let go and move on. But I learned something important in those years of fighting for justice. Forgiveness is not a requirement for healing. I did not need to forgive my father to build a happy life. I did not need to maintain a relationship with him to honor my mother's memory. Some people do not deserve forgiveness. Some actions are too monstrous to excuse or forget. What I needed, and what I found, was peace with the truth. I accepted that my father was a man capable of terrible cruelty. I accepted that my childhood had been built on a foundation of lies and control. I accepted that my mother had suffered in ways I could never fully understand, and I accepted that none of it was my fault. The gallery became something bigger than I had originally envisioned. We started hosting workshops for survivors of domestic violence, offering free art classes as a form of therapy. We partnered with local women's shelters to provide exhibition space for their clients, giving them a platform to tell their stories and earn money from their work. We established a scholarship fund in my mother's name for young artists from abusive homes, helping them pursue their education and escape their circumstances. Izzy documented all of it, turning our story into a book that became a bestseller and a documentary that won awards at film festivals. She interviewed dozens of survivors, weaving their stories together with ours to create a powerful narrative about resilience and resistance. The book was dedicated to my mother, for Serafina Vance, who fought longer than anyone knew. On the 5th anniversary of my mother's death, we held a memorial exhibition at the gallery. It featured every piece of her work we could gather, borrowed from museums and private collections across the country. People flew in from as far as New York and Los Angeles to attend. The governor of Oregon came and gave a speech about domestic violence awareness. It was overwhelming and exhausting and beautiful. That evening, after everyone had left and the gallery was quiet, I sat alone with my mother's sculpture, unbroken. The bronze woman with her arms raised to the sky, her face tilted toward an unseen Sunday. I had looked at this piece hundreds of times, had stood guard over it during the exhibition, had watched countless people stop and stare and take photos. But tonight, I really saw it. My mother had created this sculpture during the worst period of her marriage. She had poured her pain and her hope and her desperate desire for freedom into this bronze figure. She had made it not as a representation of who she was, but of who she wanted to be, who she believed she could become if she could just find the strength to break free. She never got that chance. My father had stolen it from her. But in a way, she lived on in this sculpture, in all her work. Her story had not ended with her death. It had transformed, evolved, become something bigger than one woman's tragedy. It had become a movement, a conversation, a call to action. I thought about all the women who had visited the gallery over the years, the ones who had stood in front of my mother's sculptures with tears streaming down their faces, recognizing their own pain in the bronze. The ones who had whispered their own stories to me, finding courage in my mother's art to leave their own abusive situations. The ones who had said, "Thank you for telling the truth. Thank you for not staying silent." My mother had not been able to save herself, but she had saved so many others. Through her art, through her story, through the example of her daughter refusing to let her death be in vain. That was her legacy, not the years of suffering, but the light that came after. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Daniel approaching with 2 glasses of wine. He handed me one and sat down beside me on the bench facing the sculpture. "Long day," he said. "Good day," I corrected. "Hard, but good." We sat in comfortable silence, sipping our wine and watching the last light fade from the windows. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "I have been thinking," he said carefully, "about what you said earlier, during your speech, about how your mother's story needed to be told so other people could recognize the warning signs in their own lives." "Yes?" I was wondering if you had ever thought about expanding that mission, not just through the gallery, but maybe through schools, colleges, talking to young people about healthy relationships, about recognizing abuse, about having the courage to walk away. I turned to look at him. "Like speaking engagements?" "Like education," he said. "You have a powerful story, Chloe, and you are good at telling it. I just think there are a lot of people who could benefit from hearing it directly from you." The idea terrified me. Standing in front of strangers, sharing the most painful parts of my life, opening myself up to judgment and questions and the inevitable people who would say I was exaggerating or seeking attention or trying to profit from tragedy. But it also felt right. Like the next step in a journey I had been on since that rainy night at my mother's funeral. "I will think about it," I said finally. Over the next few months, I did more than think. I worked with Olivia Sterling and several domestic violence prevention organizations to develop a presentation. I practiced telling my story in a way that was honest but not exploitative, that focused on education rather than sensationalism. And then, terrified but determined, I accepted my first speaking invitation at Portland State University. The auditorium was packed with students, professors, and community members. As I stood at the podium looking out at all those faces, I felt my mother's presence so strongly it was almost physical. She would have been proud of this, I thought. Proud that I was using our pain to help others. I told them everything. About growing up in a house where love was conditional on obedience. About watching my mother slowly disappear into herself. About the warning signs I had missed or ignored. About the night I discovered my father celebrating my mother's death. About the decision to fight back instead of accepting his version of events. I told them about the fear and the doubt and the moments when I wanted to give up because the fight seemed too hard and the enemy too powerful. I told them about the importance of having people like Izzy and Olivia and Daniel, people who believed me and supported me even when the path forward was unclear. And I told them about the aftermath, about building a life in the wreckage, about learning that survival is not just about making it through the crisis, but about creating something meaningful from the experience. When I finished, there was a moment of profound silence. Then the applause started, building until the entire auditorium was on its feet. People were crying. A young woman in the front row was sobbing openly, and after the formal presentation ended, she approached me. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking. "Thank you for telling the truth about what it is really like. My boyfriend, he does some of the things you talked about, the controlling, the isolating me from my friends. I kept thinking I was overreacting, that it was not that bad, but hearing your story, I realize I need to get out before it gets worse." We talked for over an hour, and I connected her with resources on campus and in the community. She left with a folder of information and my personal phone number, which I rarely gave out but felt compelled to share. A week later, she texted me to say she had ended the relationship and moved back in with her parents. She was safe. That became my new mission. I continued running the gallery, but I also started speaking regularly at schools, conferences, and corporate events. I talked about recognizing the signs of abuse. I talked about the financial control tactics abusers use. I talked about the importance of believing survivors and the systemic failures that allow abuse to continue unchecked. Some talks were easier than others. Some audiences were receptive and engaged. Others were skeptical or hostile, full of people who wanted to argue that I was vilifying men or that false accusations were the real problem, or that I had just had bad luck with my particular father. I learned to handle those objections with facts and compassion, to acknowledge complexity while refusing to back down from the truth. Izzy often traveled with me, documenting the talks for her podcast and offering moral support when things got difficult. She had become something more than a friend. She was my partner in this work, my collaborator, my sister in every way that mattered. When she got engaged to a wonderful woman named Maria, a therapist who worked with trauma survivors, I cried happy tears for the first time in years. Life was not perfect. I still had nightmares sometimes, waking up in the middle of the night convinced I had heard my father's voice or that something terrible was about to happen. I still struggled with trust, with letting people get close, with believing that happiness could last. Therapy helped. So did Daniel's patient understanding and the community I had built around me. On what would have been my mother's 60th birthday, we held a celebration at the gallery instead of a memorial. We displayed her work alongside pieces from the artists she had inspired and the survivors who had found healing through our programs. We served her favorite foods and played the classical music she had loved. We told stories about her talent, her kindness, her strength. Olivia Sterling gave a toast. "To Serafina Vance," she said, raising her glass. "Who faced unimaginable darkness but left behind a legacy of light? Who could not save herself but saved countless others? Who reminded us all that justice matters, that truth matters, and that the love between a mother and daughter is stronger than death." We drank to that, all of us. And as I looked around the room at the people who had gathered, at the lives that had been changed by my mother's story and my determination to tell it, I felt something settle in my chest. Not the absence of grief, which I knew would never fully leave me, but something else. Purpose. Meaning. Peace. Later that night, Daniel and I walked along the beach under a sky full of stars. The ocean was calm, the waves gentle against the shore. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from that rain-soaked night at my mother's funeral to this moment of contentment and hope. "Do you ever regret it?" Daniel asked. "Going after him? Sometimes people say ignorance is bliss." I considered the question seriously. My life would have been simpler if I had accepted my father's version of events, if I had signed his papers, taken my small portion of the inheritance, and moved on. If I had never broken into his office, never found those recordings, never set in motion the chain of events that brought him down, but my mother would still be dead. Her real death would have been covered up, her suffering erased, her murderer free to enjoy the life he had stolen from her. And I would have lived the rest of my life not knowing the truth, always wondering, always carrying the weight of unanswered questions. "No," I said finally, "I do not regret it. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, but it was also the right thing, the only thing." "I am proud of you," Daniel said softly. "Your mother would be too." We continued walking, our footsteps leaving temporary marks in the sand that the waves would soon wash away. But some marks, I had learned, go deeper than the surface. Some legacies endure long after the physical evidence has disappeared. My mother's legacy lived on in every sculpture, every painting, every piece of art that spoke truth to power. It lived on in the gallery that bore her name, in the scholarships that helped young artists escape abuse, in the workshops that taught survivors they were not alone. It lived on in the lives saved because someone heard our story and recognized themselves in it, because they found the courage to leave before it was too late. And it lived on in me, in my determination to never let anyone else suffer in silence, in my refusal to accept injustice or cruelty as inevitable, in my commitment to building a life that honored her memory not through grief but through action. 7 years after my mother's death, I received word that my father had died in prison. A stroke, quick and unexpected. I felt nothing when I heard the news. No relief, no satisfaction, no sadness. He had become irrelevant to my life, a cautionary tale rather than a living presence. His death changed nothing because I had already reclaimed everything he had tried to take from me. I did not attend his funeral. I did not visit his grave. I did not speak to the few remaining relatives who reached out, trying to guilt me into some show of mourning for the man who had destroyed my family. Instead, I spent that day at the gallery, teaching a workshop to a group of teenage girls from a local shelter, showing them how to use art to process their trauma and imagine their futures. One girl, maybe 15 years old with defiant eyes and defensive body language, asked me why I did this work. "What do you get out of it?" she demanded. "Why do you care about a bunch of messed up kids you do not even know?" I looked at her, seeing myself in her anger and her pain. "Because someone should have cared about my mother," I said honestly. "Someone should have stepped in, should have asked the right questions, should have given her a way out. They did not, and she died. But I can care about you. I can ask the right questions. I can help you find your way out, and maybe that will not fix what happened to me, but it might prevent what could happen to you." She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Show me." So I did. I showed her how to take the broken pieces of her experience and transform them into something powerful. I showed her that her story mattered, that her pain was valid, that she deserved better than what she had been given. And when she created her first piece, a collage of magazine cutouts and paint that depicted a girl stepping out of darkness into light, she cried, "I did not know I could do this." She whispered, "I did not know I had this in me." "You have always had it," I told her. "You just needed someone to help you see it." That was my mother's final gift to me. Not just her art or her estate or even her story, but the understanding that we all have the power to create something beautiful from our pain. That survival is not passive but active, a choice we make every day to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep believing that tomorrow can be better than today. As I locked up the gallery that evening and drove home through the coastal twilight, I felt my mother's presence one last time. Not the broken woman from the recordings or even the vibrant artist from my childhood memories, but something more elemental, a sense of peace, of completion, of a circle finally closed. I pulled over at a scenic overlook and got out of the car, walking to the edge where I could see the ocean stretching out to the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple and gold. I thought about sending a message to my mother, some final words of love or forgiveness or goodbye. But words felt inadequate for what I needed to say, so instead, I simply stood there, feeling the wind on my face and the solid earth beneath my feet, and I chose to believe that she knew. That somewhere, somehow, she understood what I had done and why, that she was proud of the woman I had become and the life I had built from the ashes of our shared tragedy. "I love you, Mom," I whispered into the wind, "and I'm okay now. We are both okay." The sun slipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. I stood there a while longer, watching the night unfold, feeling more at peace than I had in years. Then I got back in my car and drove home to Daniel, to our small house overlooking the ocean, to the life I had chosen and fought for and built with my own 2 hands. The ghost from the past had finally been laid to rest, and I, Chloe Vance, daughter of Seraphina, survivor of Maxwell Thorne's cruelty, was free at last.